Hey everyone, my name is Anders Leonard, and I'm going to talk today about the latest drama in HEMA, which is HEMA and racism. But before I do that, I have a really important message. If you're transgender, if you're gay, if you're a person of color, whatever religion you believe in, it doesn't matter. You are welcome in HEMA, and you will be welcomed by HEMA. In my 15 years of doing HEMA, I've never ever run across a club that wouldn't welcome you or that would consider this an issue of any sort. You would get the full support of the community. It's a bunch of happy and funny people with a lot of love. And I can back this up also. The Swedish Federation, HEMA Federation, did a survey which was responded to by almost half of all the practitioners in Sweden, and there was almost no one who had experienced racism in HEMA. So this idea that there's racism in HEMA and so on, there might be a little bit. I mean, there are people in HEMA, but that's not the point. HEMA is not ridden with racism. So don't listen to that. Please come and train with us. Okay, so moving on. Today I will talk a little bit about a concern that is raised within this discussion, and that is medievalism used for political purposes. And you often hear, everyone knows about how Nazis sort of picked ideas of the medieval period and racially pure Europe, and they picked ideas from many, like the swastika from Hinduism or whatever, a lot of different things. And they used that for political purposes. Now, that is something that is sort of common knowledge, but anyone who is at least a little bit into the history of ideas, that sort of thing, will also know that the medieval period has been used by almost every political faction that there is. It's been used from left to right to be used as a canvas on which you can paint your utopian idea of a society. And there are reasons for this. The medieval period was a pre-modern period, and it sort of embodies a lot of the ideals that we have in our myths and in our legends, which is why it's so popular within, with fantasy movies and books and stuff like that, right? So since it's pre-modern and pre-industrial era, it also has a connotation of a more natural order. And this was used by people like Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, to Kropotkin, who I will talk about later, as the natural state. When Burke saw the medieval period as something that had been before the revolutions and where there was a more natural order in the guilds, Kropotkin saw it the same way. Okay, so there is no debate that the medieval period and medievalism is sometimes used for political purposes, but it's not just the right, the left do that as well, and these people who are raising the concerns of racism in HEMA, they are also using medievalism for their ideology and purposes in a slightly new way, but nevertheless. Okay. So why are they doing this? Well, they're doing it because having a political weapon like, the possibility to brand someone with the scarlet letter R, as in they're racist, it gives them power, right, to push forward their own political ideas. So it's a very powerful tool. But if HEMA really was filled with Nazis, it wouldn't be these guys who were doing the witch hunting, right? It would be people who are gay or Jews or whatever that were hunted, or leftists in general, and they are not. Now, I just want to take a pause here, and I want to say something about the left. I'm going to use the word leftists a lot, but we're not talking about all leftists. There are plenty of people, some of which who have spoken in my defense in this thing, like Dave Rawlings, for example, who has Fighters Against Racism, and Nigel Plum, who's also spoken up in defense of me. Both are great people. They're raving mad leftists, I love them. They've stayed at my house when they were in Gothenburg. So it's not everyone. It's a little fringe group of people who are prone to, they will stop at nothing really to damage your name and your reputation and things like that. So, but it's not everyone, and it's really important to know that not everyone is trying to force you to recite their credo or they'll burn you at the stakes. So a quick background then to this. This video was prompted by one of them using a photo of my then one-year-old son holding this book by Jack Donovan, The Way of Men. And you know, anyone who has a kid and bookshelves will know that a kid will rummage through those books and tear them apart or whatever. I found him with that book looking like he was reading it, so I took a photo because it was funny that a one-year-old kid, at that time he was 1 year old, was reading a book about manliness, right? So I thought that was funny. I took a photo, I put it up on my blog. It could have been a whole range of books. It could have been these books that I have here about Nazism or National Socialism in Sweden from an anti-fascist perspective. It could have been Susan Faluti's Backlash. It could have been Daniel Guerin's book on anarchism. It could have been Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. It could have been Mathiesen. It could have been Bertrand Russell. It could have been the story of an anarchist in Spain during the Civil War. It could have been Emma Goldman. It could have been Marx. It could have been the Communist Manifesto. They wouldn't have minded that at all. They would have loved it. Oh, great fun. It could have been a book about federalism from a syndicalist perspective, or Noam Chomsky, or whatever. It could have been Mikhail Bakunin, or, who I'm going to speak a little bit about, Murray Bookchin. They wouldn't mind that at all, you know. But since it was a book by Jack Donovan, who's not their favorite person, that was an indication of a thought crime. So that they rushed to the defense and to gather up the books, so to speak, and burn them in a pyre, because they cannot accept that anyone would read anything that is not something to their liking, right? And they're saying this, quite frankly, they're saying this openly. You know, why would he expose his son to fascist literature? The kid was 1 year old. He doesn't read. And, you know, if you can't just call everyone a fascist or whatever, even if you think it's fascist, then, you know, why don't you read it? Buy the book, read it, and make up your own mind. It's, you know, it's not a big deal. It's a book, you know. I enjoyed it. I recommend you to read it. That is, of course, not something that they accept. So they would try to do a character assassination of me based on this. And they basically behave like political commissars, right? Fixing things who they don't like. So if I had if you had picked up a different book on my bookshelf, it could have been this book, Staffan Tjärnström, the Cathedral of the Future. Now, this book is, Staffan Tjärnström is a lecturer at the Stockholm University, History of Ideas, and he goes through the medieval period, or medievalism, and how it's been used for political purposes. And he takes off by, you know, because he has this image on the front. It's actually from the first manifesto of the Bauhaus movement, modernist Bauhaus movement. They had a cathedral on the front page of their first manifesto. Why would they have that? Well, it goes back a long time in the history of ideas. That the cathedral and as the medieval period started, it was fractioned into the Roman Empire was fractioned, right? So it was the spiritual leadership of the Catholic Church, the Christianity, that took over as the unifying factor. of these nations. So that is how they saw it. It was like an idea of a cathedral of ideas that would move people into the future, not spiritually necessarily, but socially and as the modernist movement. So that is how they viewed it, and that sort of concept goes far back. So and as I said before, it's also used by socialists. So in the sort of in between art and politics, you'd find people like Ruskin or William Morris, Thomas Carlyle, who were socialists and saw the medieval period as artistic and a social inspiration for them. And I mentioned Kropotkin before. Now, Kropotkin is one of the big 19th century anarchist thinkers. And he looked at Darwin and he saw his theories on evolution, and he said there's something missing here. There is not the survival of the fittest is not everything, because there's also that we're helping each other. So he came up with this idea of mutual aid, and he saw that represented, for example, in the guild system. He was interested in this because, pre-strong state, it's people rely on each other instead to a larger degree, and they organize in a way. And the guild system lasted for a very long time. You might go back as far as the Roman period, that you had trade guilds where people would work together and have a system, a hierarchy, and so on, where they could do work and own the means of production, as it were, in the socialist mind, right? So you have those, and a friend of Kropotkin's and of William Morris actually was Edward Carpenter, who was also a socialist, who were also looking to the medieval period as an inspiration, as a sort of a canvas that you could project your ideas and ideals and your utopia on. Proudhon, the father of anarchism, he looked also to the sort of the cathedral, right? But not to the cathedral specifically, but the idea of the Christian charity. He saw that as an idea that he used in his political term mutualism, which he formulated in his later years. Although he rejected, of course, the spirituality of Christianity. Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, Alexander Herzen, the socialist architect Penty, Gustav Landauer, and also very interestingly Martin Buber, who was a German Jewish philosopher and mystic, who embraced the ideas of Zionism. So he was in a Neue Gemeinschaft, a movement, and he wanted to take the idea of a Gemeinschaft but turn it into a Jewish foundation. So he looked then at the medieval period for those things. And the list goes on, even into our time and day. So you would have, for example, someone like Murray Bookchin, who's been hugely influential in the left. Not that most of the left knows this, but he has been. He's the father of eco-anarchism and the Green Movement, you could say. He's also the inspiration for YPG, the Kurdish movement, famous feminist movement, as an ideological role model for them. He was hugely inspired by Kropotkin and these ideas of the medieval period and the mutual aid, so to speak. So it's something that goes on in the history of ideas, right? And these ideologies, and not necessarily always representing the medieval period correctly. What they're doing is they're being inspired by it, and they're taking bits and pieces, as you would, looking to the past to find a solution for the future. I do not disagree with that approach at all. I think it's probably good. It depends on what you're doing with it. It can be useful, and it can be something really bad. It definitely depends on what you're trying to do, right? So all these political thinkers are doing something to use the medieval period in their own way, so to speak. So it's not something that is only done by the right. And by doing it, by looking to the history of mankind to draw wisdom from there, doesn't necessarily mean that as soon as you're a right wing in doing that, you're become a Nazi. That is not how it works. So why are they doing that? That is sort of the key to understanding why they're doing this. If you can portray the Nazis as being this, oh, they have the wrong idea about the medieval period, they're ahistorical, but when we're doing it, it's fine. They need that position because then they can label anyone who's to the right of them as on their way to Nazism. They can see Nazism or racism in anything, regardless of what their political stance really is. Doesn't really matter. But I got a quote the other day actually about Martin Buber. I'm going to read that. One cannot, in the nature of things, expect a little tree that has been turned into a club to put forth leaves. I find that a very good quote. They're making this club that they're sort of hitting everyone over the head with, and of course, this will never flourish. This is not a very fruitful way of doing things. Okay, so that is, I think, all I want to say about this. Use this information as a vaccination. Vaccinate yourself against these. Go and read a book, whatever book it is. Read Zygmunt Bauman's Auschwitz and Modern Society. The Holocaust is called in English, and the Modern Society, I think. Or whatever. Read Marx. Read any book, and hopefully we'll all come out stronger and better for it. And as I began by saying, if you are interested in HEMA, if you're a person of color, if you're transgender, if you're gay, whatever, we don't care. You're welcome.